Extinction Rebellion is a rebellion, grassroots movement working from the ground up to take action against climate change. Something very central to the movement is to tell the truth and act as if the truth is real. So we don't believe that signing petitions or just going on marches is an appropriate response to the level of climate crisis that we're currently in right now. We want people to know what the crisis is, because how can you make decisions if you don't know what the situation is? So we're telling the truth, and to act as if it's real, we think the most legitimate way to respond to the situation is to rebel against the government, which has failed to uphold its side of the contract, of the social contract between us and them. So that means civil disobedience, taking to the street. 12 years left to act before it gets to a point where we're heading for worst case scenarios, which is mass famine and drought and huge amounts of the earth becoming completely uninhabitable, hundreds of thousands of refugees, climate refugees. Really, really horrific situation. And the government and the media sort of box climate change into a little area on the news. You have to search through environment down into climate change to find articles about, oh, the ice caps are melting a bit. They're not being straight with how dire the situation is. And if you ask the majority of people what the situation regarding climate change is, they might say, oh, you know, it's global warming, right? It's getting a bit hotter. They won't have the information that it is as bad as it is, and that, you know, people are already dying as a result of climate change, and that here in Europe we might be experiencing food shortages within the next 5 to 10 years. People don't know that. So instead of saying, oh, you know, we're a group of people who've self-selected and come together, we think we know what's going on, what we're saying is something very different. We think dramatic changes need to be made, like radical action needs to be taken. We're just not saying we know exactly what it is. We're saying what we need is a body of people who are going to be educated and have discussions and learn and talk about the potential outcomes, and then make these their careers depend on them getting re-elected, right? So if they're suddenly coming out and saying, oh, in the next 15 years you're all going to be starving, probably people are going to be like, oh no. People who it's not their career, it's more like a jury duty. It's very serious. It's very strange talking about it, because to talk about it and yet to continue living your life in the way that you're living it is directly contradicting what you should be doing. That's why so many people here have quit their jobs and are rebelling full time, right? People are dying every day as a result of climate change. There are wildfires that happened last summer. It's one example. I don't know if you heard about in Greece, there was that village of 27 burned to death. Yeah, this is one example of so many of people who've lost their home as a result of flooding, land that's coming uninhabitable because it's coming too hot, the places where all our food is growing, which is going to become infertile very soon. It's absolutely terrifying, and trying to process this information is not an easy thing to do. So it's quite hard when someone says, how bad is the situation, to know how to respond without sort of bursting into tears. I believe that the responsibility doesn't lie with the individual, it's with the corporations and with the government, and that's why our demands are not directed at individuals. We're not telling people to stop flying, though I think if you speak to a lot of people in this movement, they would say they don't fly. The point is, those individual choices themselves are not enough to make the radical change that we need. What we need is systemic change. People, oh no, climate change is happening because you still use plastic straws when you go out for a drink. It's like 70% comes from these 100 companies. Only 2% is from the UK as a whole. Even if the entirety of this country went carbon neutral, it would reduce 2%. It's nothing. The scale is beyond what we can imagine. So to try and address it in any way other than on a mass scale makes no sense. These corporations and all these activities which are resulting in the destruction of our planet and the deaths of animals and humans across the entire world, we're not going to partake in it anymore. Not by not going to the supermarket and buying our food, because actually we need food, but by saying we're going to disrupt the system. It's actually about people not willing to go to prison. And I always say to people, take a moment to think about why we live the lives that we live today, where the freedoms that we enjoy come from. We're sitting here as women who can vote and who have been educated. We live in a society which is incredibly multicultural, where people of all sexualities are, at least in some way and in some places, free to be who they are. Why is that? If you look back at history, it's because people before us made sacrifices. People before us got arrested, were ostracized by society, went to prison, were killed for movements. And when we look back at these individuals, we think about people like Mandela, Rosa Parks. We don't think of them as criminals. We think of them as heroes, as the people who we owe our freedoms to.
Yeah.
And what I urge people to do when they think about Extinction Rebellion is to consider it in the same light. That the sacrifices that we're making, that people are willing to make for this movement, for this cause, are no different than the sacrifices that people made in the past. It's exactly the same. It's because we want to have a future.